Hey folks, Jack from Moonshift Audio here. In this video I'm going to be going through 7 different types of reverb. I'll go into their history, suitable uses for each one, which plugins I like to use, and give some demos of how they can work on various sources. First up, room reverb. Room reverbs are all around us. I'm guessing you're probably in a room right now. Every space has an echo, and if you've ever been in an anechoic chamber, you'll know that completely dead spaces sound super weird. Room reverbs are generally models of small spaces, so they usually have a pretty short decay time, like under 1 second kind of thing. But they can go bigger than you might think. They are a great way to add some natural liveliness and colour to sounds. If you're going for a natural sounding recording, you can send a bit of each of your instruments to the same room reverb bus to help give a sense that all the parts are being played in the same space, which is really helpful in acoustic music like jazz and folk, but I really like it on drums, guitars, and sometimes even on bass. My go-to plugins for a room reverb are Valhalla Room, which is an excellent and versatile option with some great larger reverbs too, and Ocean Way Studios from UAD, which is just incredible at giving dry recordings a sense of being in a real-world space. I've literally never found another plugin that does this quite as well. Let's listen to some examples.
Okay, so here we are in Cubase. I've got a couple of audio tracks here. The first one is a basic drum loop that I made with a tambourine from Skaka. Now you can hear that that is dry as a bone. So I've sent a bit from each of these individual tracks out to various different reverbs so that we can take a listen. So we're going to start with room reverbs. This is dry. And now I'll bring in Ocean Way, which is probably my favourite room reverb plugin of all time. You can hear it really just a very natural sounding room. It sounds like they were recorded in a space, or hopefully Ocean Way Studios space to be specific. To hear that on another sound source, I've also got an acoustic guitar loop that sounds like this. It's super dry. And let's hear this with the room reverb. So you can hear that's really added a nice bit of life to that. Let's bring it in with the drums as well. And let's turn off the room verb. Now you wouldn't listen to that and say, oh, there's a lot of reverb on there, but when you turn it off, you really miss it. I've also got Valhalla Room up here, so let's have a listen to that and see what we can do with a similar Smallwood Room is the preset here. That's dry. It's a similar effect, but I gotta say with this one, I do love the Ocean Way.
Next up, I'm going to look at hall reverbs. Hall reverbs are designed to replicate the sound of a concert hall. In the real world, these spaces have been designed specifically for an excellent acoustic. They're big spaces, so they have long reverb tails or decay times, and the best ones are really well balanced, so the reverb will decay at the same rate across the whole frequency spectrum, although sometimes orchestral halls will naturally emphasize the low end, which helps the orchestra to sound larger than life if you're in the room with them. For obvious reasons, hall reverbs are the perfect choice for orchestral sounds and strings, but they also sound really nice on vocals and pretty much anything you want to add a classy sense of depth to. Because their decay times can go up to 8 seconds or more, you've got to be careful not to use too much of this kind of reverb in your mix. If you overdo it, you can end up with a muddy, soupy mess. There are so many great hall reverb plugins out there to choose from. I particularly like the Valhalla Vintage Verb and the classic Lexicon 480L. Here's some audio.
I've got a couple of different sound sources to demonstrate the hall verb. I've got this vocal loop that I got off Splice.
Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak.
Now you can hear a little bit of the room that was recorded in, but that's often the case and it's not a problem. You can quite happily slap extra reverb on top of that, and in the mix you'd never know. So for the hall, I've got Lexicon 480L here. Let's see what that sounds like.
Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak.
You can hear that lovely smooth quality there, but you can also hear how you could get a bit of low end build up if you're not careful. Now I've also got here a kind of mellotron string sound that I got from Arturia's augmented strings instrument. Because it's based on a kind of tape loop, it dies away very quickly at the end of each note. Let's see how we can really enhance that with a hall reverb. This time I'm using Valhalla Vintage Verb on a very nice hall preset. Let's see the difference. The whole thing just sounds so much more rich. Here's without. It's not just the tail ends of the notes. It's really fattened the whole thing up. Let's bring in the vocal again.
Don't let me down, say you will stay.
And the vocal verb.
I can't endure one more heartbreak. Don't treat it like my love's a waste. Don't push me when I'm on the edge.
And that lovely reverb tail there. Quite a long decay on that one, 3.7 seconds.
Number 3 on our list is chambers. Chamber reverbs were pretty much the first recording reverbs ever developed. Studio owners who wanted to be able to add a reverb to their recordings would build a special room in the building with deliberately reflective surfaces for the walls, like bare plaster, for example. They would put the speakers in the room to play the sounds they wanted to add reverb to, and a microphone, or several, to record the reverb of the space back into the desk. Because the reverb depended on the shape, size and material construction of the room, reverb chambers varied wildly in tone and decay time, and most of them are absolutely one of a kind. In some cases, like the Hitsville reverb chambers, the sound of these reverbs became synonymous with an entire genre, and chambers like the ones under the Capitol Records building and the Abbey Road studios are still sought after by engineers today, but there are some excellent model plugins available too. Chambers generally sound a bit like halls, with a really thick, rich character, but they often have a bit more clarity to them, which can help keep things from ending up too muddy. They also have a very particular energy, which can really give elements a lift, but the trade-off is that they're generally quite sort of present, so if you're going for a subtle effect, they might not be the right choice. I like to use chambers mostly on a lead vocal, but they can sound great on guitar, strings, just about anything really if it fits the mix. Let's take a listen.
For the chamber, my go-to reverb plugin is Capital Chambers. It's a UAD plugin, and I really love it. I'm using the same vocal loop for this demonstration. Let's hear it dry.
Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak. Don't treat it like my love's a waste. Don't push me when I'm on the edge.
You can hear that it's a much brighter reverb than the hall was, and so it'll cut through a mix better, but it also can clutter a mix more. Here's another guitar loop. Very dry. And here's another instance of Capital Chambers with a different preset. Really brings it to life. And both together.
Don't push me when I'm on the edge. Don't let me down, say you will stay.
This next reverb type is plates. So all the reverbs we looked at so far are modelling real world spaces. But that's not the only way to get a reverb. A plate reverb is literally a sheet of metal that's been suspended in a box. There's a driver or a small speaker in there to play your audio through, which will then vibrate the metal, and one or two pickups like you might find on a guitar or contact mics to record the sound coming back off the plate. The result of this is an interesting but often flattering sound. The presence frequencies and high end tend to be boosted at the start of the verb, and as the tail dies away, the low end is often softened a bit, so plates are often described as having a kind of smooth sound. Plate reverbs are a great choice for vocals, where they can give a kind of smear to the sound, but they also work great on snares, toms, guitars, and are always worth a look if you're playing around with different options. Plugins wise, the UAD EMT140 is an excellent emulation of a classic plate, and the Sound Toys Little Plate is surprisingly versatile for such a simple plugin. Keep your eye on that one as it's often available for free. Here are some examples.
Okay, for a vocal plate, I'm using the UAD EMT140, which is an absolute classic. Let's take a listen.
Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak. Don't treat it like my love's a waste.
So you can hear there is a little bit of presence there at the start of each reverb tail, but it very quickly dies away and you're just left with a very nice creamy mid-range. Plates are also great on snare drums, and in this case I'm using Sound Toys Little Plate, which is such a simple plugin. You've just got the low roll off, a mix knob and the decay time, but it sounds great. Nice smooth tail on that snare. I'll bring the room back in just so you can hear it in the mix.
Don't push me when I'm on the edge. Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak.
Next up, spring reverbs. Sticking with the mechanical reverbs, springs work in a similar way to plates. A small driver called a transducer is used to vibrate one or more springs in a box, and at the other end of the springs goes a pickup or a contact mic to capture the sound. These reverbs are often found in guitar amps, but you can get standalone boxes or spring reverb tanks for studio use. Spring reverbs were used a lot in early dub reggae, and if you've ever wondered what that crashing sound you can hear on a lot of classic tracks by King Tubby and the like, it's literally someone hitting the box with the spring in it. It makes a great noise like this. Spring reverbs are super distinctive, and they have a really metallic sort of quality that doesn't suit every sound, but when it works, it really works. The way they soften the mid-range makes them great for guitars, which is no surprise given how many guitar amps feature a spring reverb, but I've found uses for them on rock organs and snares and other things as well. UAD do an excellent plug-in version of the BX20 reverb, but I also really like the Spring 636 by Arturia.
To demonstrate the spring reverb, I brought the guitar loop back. And this is the Arturia Rev Spring 636. You can hear that metallic, kind of springy, surprise, surprise, character to it. I really like the Rev Spring because it has that really twangy metallic character to it. It almost feels like you could reach out and bash the box. Another option is the UAD BX20, which is an AKG reverb. You don't see much outboard made by those guys, they're more known for their mics. But this one's got a much richer and smoother tone to it. I'm using it to add some reverb to a Rhodes type organ. Super dry.
Okay, now we're moving on to ambience reverbs. Ambience reverbs are a bit of a strange one, but that doesn't mean they aren't really useful. These reverb algorithms aren't really trying to model any particular space, which means they can do some really unusual things. You could have an ambience that's just early reflections, or one that has no early reflections at all and is just a smooth tail, so they're not bound by the laws of physics. But for the most part, when you talk about ambiences, you're talking about very small reverbs, smaller than room reverbs, usually with decay times of less than half a second. You can use an ambience verb to help dry sound fit into a mix with other instruments that are recorded in a small space, and they're also used a lot in post-production for TV and film, where the actors overdub their parts in a heavily treated, very dry dubbing suite, and the dubbing mixer needs to make it sound like they're in a small room or a car or another real-world space. My favourite use of ambience, though, is as a neat way to bridge the gap between a big vocal reverb with a pre-delay, giving the vocal a bit of extra thickness and body before the main reverb kicks in. It's also a really good choice for rap vocals, where you just want to thicken them up a bit without making them any less upfront. There are some great ambiences in Valhalla Room, and the Lexicon 480L is famous partly for its own excellent ambience algorithm.
Okay, here's our vocal loop again, and I'm sending it to another instance of the Lexicon 480L. And the algorithm I've selected is Closet, which is the smallest ambience there. So here's the dry vocal.
Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak.
And even with that little bit of room tone on the recording, you should still hear a difference when I bring in this ambience.
Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak. Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak.
It's a really nice way to thicken up a vocal without making it sound verby and roomy and sending it back in the mix. It's also great if your main vocal reverb has got something of a pre-delay on it. So for example, if we go back to the Hall, another 480L, I'm just going to really emphasize this by bringing up the pre-delay to 50 milliseconds.
Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak.
So the reverb isn't instantly kind of hugging that vocal. So what we can do is we can add the ambience to give you a short space, which will kind of bridge the gap between the vocal, the pre-delay before the main reverb kicks in, and just kind of smooth the whole thing out and fill it all out nicely. Let's listen. So here's just the Hall.
Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak. Don't let me down, say you will stay. I can't endure one more heartbreak.
So you can see why, in some cases, using two different reverbs from the same vocal send is a really nice way to get a full, rich vocal sound. For my last example, I've got a loop of some grime vocals from Splice, and I'm just going to play that with and without an ambience.
We ain't like them, never keep it real in the
That's
ends.
dry.
Never leave crib or the ends. Me and that kid, we don't even need to pretend.
I'll
Me
bring
and
it
them
in.
boys, we ain't friends. We ain't like them, never keep it real in the ends. Never leave crib or the ends. Me and that kid, we don't even need to pretend. Me and them boys, we ain't friends. We ain't...
Now, for the most part, when you're mixing that kind of vocal, you want it to sound dry. You want it to be right at the front, really aggressive, but actually adding a very subtle, very small reverb like that just gives the effect that the vocal is fatter and thicker, and it can really help your overall sound.
Okay, now we're getting to the really fruity end of the list. Non-linear reverbs. Non-linear reverbs are a purely digital concept, and like the ambience algorithms, they don't have to obey the laws of physics either. These reverbs are called non-linear because they don't behave in a predictable way. Want a reverb that gets louder as it goes, or plays backwards, or never dies away at all? You're looking for non-linear. These reverbs are pretty crazy and they've got bags of character, but they're more commonly used than you might think. I'm not going to go too far into these reverbs here, as I've got a whole separate video where I show you how to use non-linear reverbs to make a huge 80s drum sound. There's a link to that down below. That's it for now. If you found this video useful, please do like and subscribe for more tips, tricks, resources and downloads here at Moonshift Audio. Till next time.